Hi everyone, it's good to have you back for another chess lesson. So today I'm going to talk about mating your opponent with just the king and a rook. And this is something that happens a lot in chess games, especially in a lot of online games and blitz or 5-minute games or less. You can see a lot of positions that look like what I currently have on the board. You have a king, your opponent has a king, and you just have a rook. Okay, so it is possible to mate your opponent in this position. You just need to know how to get to the final position and the final mating pattern. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about in the current video. Let me show you what the final position should look like if you want to mate your opponent with just a king and a rook. Okay, if you remember from my previous video on how to mate with just a king and a queen, you will remember that generally you want your opponent's king down here in the first rank or up here in the 8th rank or on one of the sides of the board. You want the opponent to be out of space to run away from you. Okay, so let's say that we're going to put the opponent's king down here. And what you want is your king to be right in front of the opponent. And if you then put your rook here, this is a checkmate, okay? It is a checkmate because your opponent cannot move away from this. Well, obviously you're giving a check in this rank. So the opponent, he cannot go here to the left and they cannot go here to the right because this is all covered by your rook. Now, they also cannot go up because all of these squares here are going to be covered by your king, okay? So, and the same position can happen on any of the 4 sides of the board. So this is the final position you want when you're trying to checkmate your opponent. It can happen on the C file. It could also happen on the A file, for example, or it can happen on any other files, as long as the 2 kings are facing each other, okay? Now, let's get back to this point of kings facing each other. What you want is a position that looks like this. And this is called the opposition. Let me get the rook out of the way. Okay, this is called the opposition. So you want the kings to be in opposition and you want it to be your turn. Okay, in a way, you essentially want to force your opponent into this position so that the kings are in opposition. And now what's so magical about this? The magical thing about the opposition is now if you give a check, your opponent can only go down. Okay, so here, if you're in the 3rd rank and you give a check with your rook, the opponent cannot go up to the 4th rank, right? All of these squares are covered. They would have to go down to the 2nd rank. Okay, that's why opposition is important. Now, the reason it is important to be in opposition and for it to be your opponent's turn is this. Let's say if it is, sorry, to be in opposition and for it to be your turn. If you're in opposition, it is your opponent's turn, they can just quickly run away from you, right? And if you come back and try to force the opposition, they could go the other way around. Now, if you give a check, the opposition could just run away from here, right? So you have not managed to force them down to the 1st rank, okay? Now, one more time, before I show you the pattern, what you want is for the 2 kings to be in opposition and you want it to be your turn, okay? In a way, you want to force the opponent into this position so that then you can give this check. Now they would have to go down, okay? Now, let's think of a hypothetical position. Let's say, I don't know, the rook is down here and your king is here and the opponent's king is here. And I'm going to try to force the opponent to go, let's say we're going to try to force the opponent here to be mated here on the left-hand side, okay? So what I have to do is to create a final position that looks like something like this. Okay, so I'm going to mate them here. Now, let's go back to this position that I have set up and think about how I can do that. Okay, so first thing I want to do is to create the opposition, and I want it to be opposition and for it to be my turn, okay? So let's say this is white's turn and you want to start this mating pattern. The first thing you would want to do is to close this D file. Okay, so essentially you do not want the opposition king to be able to move away from here. So if it is your turn, the first thing you should do is to take your rook and take it here. Now you have protected the d file. Okay, now what can your opponent do? If they move their king up here, then they have fallen into the opposition. Now you can give a check and they would only have to go down, right? So Black here would want to avoid opposition, which means that they would have to go either here or they would have to go down. If they go down, then you can easily just close this ring. Now, this file, now you have forced them down even further, right? So it is not in their interest to go down. What they should do is to go down here to C3. Now you can just follow them simply to the end of the board. At some point, they will run out of space and they would have to come back and be forced into opposition. So now they go to C1, you go to E2, and now they have no other square to go, so they would have to go back up. At this point, you can simply give a check, and now they have to go down again, right? So now you're just forcing them to the side of the board. Let's say the opponent now says, all right, so I don't want to go to this side anymore. I want to go to this other side where I have a lot of room, right? So what they want to do is to now chase your rook in a way, come up to the 8th rank and attack your rook. So you can simply just come down here and they would try to get closer to the rook and you just follow them with your king. Now the opponent makes a move trying to get closer to the rook. Now you have to move the rook and you can come all the way down here. Now, if the opponent comes back, now it is your turn. And remember, you want it to be the kings to be in opposition and for it to be your turn, right? So you cannot simply play king d6 because then you would be in opposition. It would be the opponent's turn, right? So you just play an extra move with your, you just play an extra move with your rook. So just move the rook back 1 square. Now, if black comes here, you can give this check and force them down again. If black goes here instead, you just simply chase them again to the end of the board. And now they would have to come back to the opposition. At this point, you can give a check, and that would take black's king down again, right? And now the same thing can happen. Now king is in a6. The next time you give a check, it is going to be checkmate, right? So you can come back to c7, and now black can, if black goes to a7 now, you just simply have this, and that's checkmate, right? So let's say black doesn't want to go to a7, they would go to a5. Again, you do a similar thing. So you would just chase black to the end of the board. And at this point, again, you will have the same thing. Black will follow your rook. You go to the other end of the board. Black goes back to a3. And now you have to make the extra move with your rook so that black falls into that same opposition again. Now, if they go to a4, you can take the rook to a7, and that's checkmate. If they go to a2 instead, you can continue to chase them to the end of the board. And now they have to go back to the opposition. And now rook a7 is checkmate. Okay, so remember, the same pattern can be set up at any side of the board. All you have to do is to make sure that black has no square to go and would have to be pushed to the side of the rook. And let me show it to you on this side also. So, and this is again checkmate. So all you want is to make sure that the kings are in opposition and it is your turn. So black will have, so when you give a check with the rook, black will have nowhere else to go. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you have other topics that you want me to talk about, feel free to let me know. Happy to talk about other topics as well. Next time I will continue these mating patterns and we'll focus on mating with 2 bishops. Thanks and see you soon.